Asterisk, asterisk, Part I, a red dust on the San Pedro Trail. Asterisk, asterisk. The buzzards had been circling since dawn. Sarah Mackenzie pressed her cheek against the rough canvas of the wagon bed, counting her breaths the way her mother had taught her during thunderstorms back in Ohio. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to her torn calico dress, mixing with the metallic taste of blood in her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue to keep from screaming. 23 wagons, 47 souls, all gone except her. The attack had come with the false dawn, when the desert sky turned purple-gray and the saguaro cacti stood like dark sentinels against the horizon. Not Apaches, as everyone had feared during those long nights around the campfire. Not Mexican bandits either. The men who descended on their wagon train had spoken English with Eastern accents, had worn store-bought clothes beneath their dusty serapes. Their leader, she'd never forget, that face bore a jagged scar from his left eye to his jaw, as if someone had tried to carve him open like a melon. "Check every wagon," the scarred man had ordered. "The old man's survey maps have to be here somewhere. And remember, no witnesses." Sarah had watched through a tear in the canvas as her father tried to protect the leather portfolio he'd guarded so carefully since Denver. Thomas Mackenzie, surveyor for the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, had died clutching those maps, his blood seeping into the very documents that marked future rail lines, and she'd overheard him telling the wagon master the location of promising copper deposits near the Dragoon Mountains. The killers had been thorough, systematic. This wasn't random violence born of greed or bloodlust. This was business. Cold, calculated business conducted at gunpoint in the middle of nowhere, where the only witnesses were the turkey vultures and the endless blue dome of sky. She'd survived by playing dead. Lying beneath her mother's body as the killers searched the wagons, her mother's blood had soaked through Sarah's dress, had pooled beneath her cheek, had filled her nostrils with its copper stench until she'd thought she might suffocate from horror alone. Even now, hours later, she could feel the weight of that still form, could hear her mother's last whispered words, "Don't move, sweet girl. No matter what happens, don't move." The sun climbed higher, transforming the desert into a furnace. Sarah's throat felt like she'd swallowed sand. Her lips were cracked, her tongue swollen. The nearest water was at Dragoon Springs, still 15 miles east. She'd never make it on foot. Not in this heat, not with the buzzards already marking her location for any predator with eyes to see. She needed to move, needed to find shelter, water, some trace of hope in this vast expanse of thorns and stone. But every time she tried to rise, her legs trembled like a newborn foal's, and the world tilted sideways in a nauseating spiral. That's when she saw the smoke. Not the black smoke of burning wagons that had dissipated hours ago. This was thin, gray, almost invisible against the bleached sky. A cooking fire, maybe, or a signal. Either way, it meant people, and people meant either salvation or death. Sarah forced herself to crawl from beneath the wagon, her movements sending the buzzards into reluctant, wing-heavy flight. They'd be back. They were patient, those birds. More patient than she could afford to be. And then, 50 miles south, Takakota studied the desert floor with eyes trained by 23 winters of survival. The prints were wrong. Everything about this was wrong. He'd left his band's camp in the Chiricahua Mountains 3 days ago, drawn by troubling news from the Mexican traders. Too many of his people had gone missing in recent months, women and children vanishing from gathering expeditions. Hunters who never returned from familiar trails. The elders suspected slave raiders, those vultures who fed on human misery, selling Apache captives to mine owners in Sonora or plantation masters in Texas. But these tracks told a different story. Shod horses, at least 20 riders, moving north with purpose. The depth of the hoof prints suggested heavy loads. The pattern showed discipline, military precision. These weren't random raiders or opportunistic bandits. This was an organized operation. Takakota touched the medicine bag at his chest, feeling the small bones and sacred stones through the soft doe skin. His grandmother's words echoed in his memory. Anger clouds the hunter's eye. Grandson, when you track evil men, track them with a cold heart, or they will turn and track you. He'd learned that lesson the hard way when his sister Ayanna had been taken 5 winters ago. His rage had made him reckless, had nearly gotten him killed in a Mexican garrison where they'd sold Apache slaves like cattle. He'd survived, but he'd never found Ayanna. The not knowing gnawed at him worse than any wound. The trail led toward the San Pedro Valley, toward the wagon roads the Americans used. Takakota had no love for the white settlers who carved up the land with their fences and fouled the water with their mining. But he knew the difference between enemies and evil. The settlers were the former. The men who'd made these tracks, they were the latter. He adjusted his rifle across his back and continued north, moving with the fluid economy of someone born to this harsh land. The desert spoke to those who knew how to listen, and right now it whispered of death on the wind. By afternoon, Sarah had found the rock face. It wasn't much a shallow cave worn by wind and time into the base of a sandstone cliff, but it offered shade, and more importantly, the dark stain on the rock suggested water seepage during the rainy season. She pressed her palms against the damp stone, then licked the moisture from her skin. It tasted of minerals and earth, but it was enough to keep her tongue from sticking to the roof of her mouth. The cave went deeper than she'd first thought. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw pictographs on the walls, spirals and stick figures, hunters and prey frozen in red ochre. Someone had sheltered here before, perhaps for centuries. The thought brought an odd comfort. If others had survived in this place, maybe she could too. She tore strips from her petticoat to bind the worst of her cuts, wincing as the fabric stuck to the dried blood. Her hands shook as she worked, reaction finally setting in now that immediate danger had passed. 20 years old, and she felt ancient. This morning she'd been worrying about her hope chest, about whether James Morrison in Tucson would still be waiting after 3 months on the trail. Now, James seemed like a character from someone else's story, someone else's life. The tears came then, hot and bitter. She let them fall, tasting salt to go with the mineral tang of the cave water. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford for long, but for these few moments, in the safety of stone and shadow, she mourned. Her parents, the Wagner family with their 3 tow-headed boys, Mrs. Chen, who taught her to make sourdough starter, Captain Mills, whose army experience had gotten them through a dozen crises until this final one. All gone, all reduced to meat for the buzzards while men counted their blood money. The sob that escaped her throat echoed off the cave walls, coming back to her multiplied and strange. She clamped her hands over her mouth, suddenly terrified. Sound carried in the desert. If the killers had left men to watch the site, if they were still searching for her father's maps. But the only answer was the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk and the whisper of wind through thorny Ocotillo. And Takakota found the massacre site as the sun touched the western peaks. The smell hit him first, death and smoke and the sickly sweet corruption that drew every carrion eater for miles. He tied his cloth over his nose and approached carefully, reading the story written in churned earth and spilled blood. This had been no raid. Raiders took what they could carry: goods, livestock, captives. These killers had taken only specific items, had searched with purpose. Papers scattered among the wreckage. Clothing trunks overturned but not looted. The violence had been a tool, not the goal. He moved among the wagons like a ghost, his moccasins silent on the blood-darkened sand. The dead told their own tales, men shot while reaching for weapons they'd never had time to draw. Women killed protecting children who died anyway. One wagon showed signs of a desperate last stand, empty shell casings glinting like brass tears in the dust. That's when he saw her footprints. Small, a woman or large child. The pattern showed injury weight favored on the left foot, drag marks suggesting exhaustion, but recent, hours old at most, leading east toward the rock faces of the Dragoon foothills. Takakota crouched beside the tracks, considering. Not his business, not his people. The smart choice was to continue south, to pick up the raiders' trail while it was fresh. Every hour lost made Ayana and the other captives more distant, more likely to disappear into the slave markets of Sonora. But his grandmother's voice came again. "The desert tests us, grandson. Not just our strength or our skill, but our spirit. When you find someone in need, you find out who you truly are." He looked east toward the Dragoons, where the last light painted the peaks blood red. The buzzards were drifting that way, speculative and patient. By morning, they'd have found whoever had made those tracks. Another dead white eye shouldn't matter to him. His people had suffered enough at their hands, the massacres, the poisoned treaties, the long walk to San Carlos that had killed so many. Yet the tracks bothered him, that dragging left foot, the handprint in the dirt where she'd fallen and pushed herself back up, the way she'd headed for the rocks, thinking like a survivor, not giving up. With a curse in 3 languages, Takakota turned east. The raiders' trail would have to wait. His grandmother had been right about many things, but especially this: once you saved someone's life, you were responsible for it. The desert was already cooling, the temperature dropping 20 degrees as the sun vanished behind the whetstones. Takakota moved swiftly through the gathering darkness, following traces invisible to most eyes, a broken twig here, a displaced pebble there, the lingering scent of fierce sweat and blood. He found the cave just as the first stars appeared. His approach was silent as an owl's flight, rifle ready. The tracks led inside, but caves could be traps as easily as shelters. He listened, heard breathing shallow, pained, but regular, alive. Then, slowly, carefully, he entered the darkness. Asterisk, Part 2, End it. Asterisk. Sarah jerked awake to the sound of breathing that wasn't her own. The cave was pitch black, but she could sense the presence, a displacement of air, a warmth that didn't belong to stone. Her hand fumbled for the broken wagon spoke she'd found earlier, gripping it like a club, though her arms trembled with exhaustion. "Who's there?" Her voice came out as a croak, throat still parched despite the moisture from the rocks. Silence. Then the soft scrape of leather on stone, deliberate and slow. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful, accented but clear. "I mean no harm. I saw the wagons, saw your tracks." An Indian. Her mind reeled between terror and desperate hope. The wagon train had been full of stories: Apaches who tortured captives, who burned settlements, but also other stories, quieter ones, told by the old-timers. Indians who'd traded fairly, who'd shared water in the desert, who'd guided lost travelers home. "Stay back." She pressed herself against the cave wall, spoke raised. "I'm armed." With a stick, not mockery in his tone, just observation. "You're hurt, bleeding. I can smell it." A scratch of flint. Then flame bloomed in the darkness. The sudden light made her squint, but she saw him clearly young, perhaps a few years older than her, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. His rifle rested against the cave wall, deliberately set aside. He fed small twigs to the flame until it grew steady. "Apache?" she whispered. He nodded. "Chiricahua. My name is Takakota." He studied her torn dress, the dark stains, the makeshift bandages. "You need proper tending." "Don't come closer." But even as she said it, a wave of dizziness made her sway. "That cut on your shoulder, it's deep. Without cleaning, fever will come. Then infection." He pulled items from his pack: a water gourd, strips of clean cloth, a small pot. "I can help, or I can leave. But if I leave, you die." The blunt truth of it hit her like cold water. She was fooling herself if she thought she could survive alone. Already she could feel the heat building in her shoulder, the angry throb of infection beginning. "Why would you help me?" He paused in his preparations. "Because I'm here. Because you need it." He met her eyes. Because somewhere, maybe someone helps my sister. There was pain in those last words, old and deep. Sarah lowered the spoke, though her grip remained white-knuckled. Your sister? Taken. 5 winters passed. He poured water into the pot, added something from a leather pouch. The smell of herbs filled the cave sage and something else, medicinal and clean. Now I track the ones who take people. The trail led past your wagons. They weren't after us. The words tumbled out. Not at first. They wanted my father's maps, railroad surveys, copper deposits. Her voice cracked. They killed everyone for papers. His jaw tightened. These men, the leader had a scarred face. Yes, she leaned forward despite herself. You know him. Josiah Creech. He sells information to the highest bidder. Also sells people. Takakota's voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened. In Sonora, they call him El Carnicero, the butcher. The fire crackled between them. Sarah shivered despite its warmth. I need to get to Tucson. Tell the marshal. You need to heal first. He gestured to her shoulder. May I? It went against everything she'd been taught, allowing a strange man to touch her, tend her wounds, and an Apache at that. But what were society's rules worth out here, where civilization ended and survival began? She nodded stiffly. All right. He moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away the ruined fabric around her shoulder. Sarah bit her lip, acutely aware of her vulnerability. But his touch was clinical, impersonal as a doctor's. This will hurt. He showed her a knife, its blade heating in the flame. For cleaning, bite this. A strip of leather. She took it between her teeth, tasting salt and smoke. When the hot blade touched the infected gash, she screamed into the leather, her body arcing with pain. Tears streamed down her cheeks as he worked, cleaning away the corruption with gentle ruthlessness. Brave, he murmured, switching to the herbal poultice. The cool paste soothed like spring rain on burned skin. Many warriors would have fainted. Don't! She spat out the leather, gasping. Don't patronize me! A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No patronizing, truth. He began wrapping clean cloth around her shoulder, careful and sure. You survived when 47 died. Walked miles with this wound. Found water, shelter. Warriors are made, not born. As he secured the bandage, a section of her dress tore further, hanging loose. Sarah grabbed at it, suddenly panicked by her state of undress, by how vulnerable she was. The movement jarred her shoulder, sending fresh fire through the wound. Let me. Takakota reached to help stabilize the bandage, gripping the shredded fabric to hold it in place while he worked. No. The word came out as a sob. Everything crashed down at once, the massacre, her losses, the pain, the sheer impossibility of her situation. She was alone with a stranger in a cave, her dress ruined, her body broken, her entire world reduced to ashes. Just end it, please, I can't. The words hung in the air like smoke. Takakota's hands stilled on the bandage, his dark eyes finding hers in the firelight. She saw her desperation reflected there, mixed with something else. Understanding. He knew this feeling. This moment when continuing seemed harder than stopping. End it, he repeated softly. No. Please. Tears ran freely now, salt tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. I have nothing, no one. They're all dead. I should be dead too. His hands gentled on the torn fabric, securing it carefully. Death is easy. Living that takes courage. I don't have any courage left. Then borrow mine. The simple statement undid her completely. She sobbed, great. Gulping sobs that shook her entire frame. Without thinking, Takakota shifted closer. His hand rose to her face, thumb brushing away tears with impossible tenderness. Your parents? He asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. They died protecting their maps. Another nod. Then honor them by living, by speaking their truth, by seeing justice done. His thumb caught another tear. The dead don't need our company. They need our voices. I don't know how, she whispered. No one does. We learn by doing. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. In my people's way, when someone saves another's life, their spirits become connected. I pulled you back from death's edge. Now you're my responsibility. I didn't ask for that. No, but the desert doesn't ask permission. His voice dropped lower. Neither does fate. She looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. His face was so close she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar on his temple, the way firelight turned his skin to burnished copper. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made her breath catch. Slowly, as if approaching a wounded deer, he leaned in and pressed his lips to her tears, first one cheek, then the other. Not passion, but benediction. Not desire, but comfort. The touch was feather-light, reverent, asking nothing and offering everything. Sarah's sob caught in her throat. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle from this fierce-looking warrior, that it broke through her despair like sunlight through storm clouds. Why, she breathed. My grandmother taught me tears are sacred. They carry pain out of the body. To kiss them away is to share the burden. He pulled back slightly, watching her. You're not alone now. She should have been scandalized, should have pulled away, defended her virtue, maintained proper distance. But what was propriety in a cave in the desert? With death behind her and uncertainty ahead, what were society's rules to two people bound by tragedy and circumstance? I don't even know you, she whispered. No, but you will. He returned to tending her wounds. All business again. Rest now. Tomorrow we plan. Plan what? How to get justice for your family. How to find Creech. How to keep you alive long enough to do both. She watched him work, this strange Apache who'd appeared like a guardian spirit from children's tales. What about your sister? The trail will still be there. First, I see you safe. That's the promise I make to your dead. He looked up. And to you. I'm not your responsibility. You are now. Simple, final. Among my people, such bonds aren't taken lightly. The fire crackled lower. Outside, a coyote howled, answered by another across the valley. The desert night wrapped around their small shelter, vast and full of dangers. But for the first moment since the attack, Sarah didn't feel entirely alone. My name is Sarah, she offered quietly. Sarah Mackenzie. Sarah. He tested the name, nodded. Tomorrow, Sarah Mackenzie, you begin learning to survive. Not just breathing, living, fighting. There's a difference. What if I can't? Then I teach you until you can. He banked the fire carefully, preserving coals for morning. Sleep, I'll watch. You must be tired too. I've tracked 3 days. One more night is nothing. He settled against the cave wall, rifle across his knees. Sleep. She wanted to protest, but exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. The herbal poultice had numbed the worst of the pain, and the cave felt almost warm with the banked fire and another human presence. Takakota. Thank you. He glanced at her, that ghost smile returning. Don't thank me yet. Tomorrow I start teaching you Apache ways. You may curse me instead. Despite everything, the pain, the loss, the uncertainty, Sarah found herself almost smiling in return. It felt like betrayal to feel anything but grief. Yet life seemed determined to continue whether she willed it or not. She closed her eyes, listening to the night sounds and the soft rhythm of his breathing. Somewhere out there. Creech counted his blood money. Somewhere. Families waited for loved ones who would never return. Somewhere. The wheels of justice ground slowly in cities far from this wild place. But here, in a cave painted with ancient stories, Two unlikely souls had found each other across a divide of culture and circumstance. It wasn't salvation, not yet, but it was a beginning. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was of her mother's final words: "No matter what happens, don't move." She'd moved anyway, and somehow, against all odds, she was still alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new pain, but tonight, watched over by an Apache warrior who kissed tears like prayers, she could rest. The desert waited, patient and eternal, and somewhere in its vast silence, justice also waited its turn. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 3, Hidden Valley and Lessons in Survival. Asterisk, asterisk. Sarah woke to the sound of grinding stone. Takakota sat cross-legged near the cave entrance, working dried plants between two rocks with practiced rhythm. Morning light filtered through, painting dust motes gold in the air. "Good. You slept through the night without fever." He didn't look up from his work. "That means the infection won't take you." She pushed herself upright, wincing as her shoulder protested. Her dress had dried stiff with blood and dirt, but the makeshift repairs held. "What are you making?" "Pine needle tea. Helps the blood recover." He poured the crushed needles into his small pot. "First lesson, the desert provides everything if you know how to ask." "I don't suppose it provides coffee." That earned her a quick glance, almost amused. "Mesquite beans, roasted right, not the same, but close enough." He gestured to a flat stone beside him. "Come, time to start." Sarah moved carefully to sit where he indicated. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the careful scarring on his arms that marked important events, the way he moved with economy born of necessity. Not handsome by Eastern standards, perhaps, but there was something compelling in his focused intensity. "Water first," he said, producing a different gourd. "Small sips? Your body forgot how to drink properly." The water tasted of leather and herbs, but it was cool and clean. She forced herself to drink slowly while he prepared the tea. "You said you'd teach me Apache ways." "To survive, not to become Apache, that's earned, not taught." He handed her the tea, bitter but strangely refreshing. "But survival is survival. Doesn't care what color you are." "Where do we start?" "Walking." He studied her feet, still in the remains of her button boots. "Those won't last 2 days. You need moccasins." "I don't suppose the desert provides those too." "No, but I have spare leather." He pulled a bundle from his pack. "You'll make them yourself. Hands that work don't have time for despair." The morning passed in concentrated effort. Takakota's teaching style was patient but exacting, showing her once, maybe twice, then watching as she struggled to copy his movements. The leather was tough, the bone needle awkward in her unpracticed hands. She pricked her fingers repeatedly, adding tiny spots of blood to the hide. "Why are you helping me?" she asked during a break, sucking on a particularly deep needle wound. "Really? Not just because I need it." He continued working on strengthening her water gourd with pine pitch. "You know Creech's face. Can identify him to your law. That helps me too." "But you could have left me and tracked him yourself." "Could have." He tested the seal on the gourd. "My grandmother had a saying, the eagle flies alone, but the wolves hunt in packs. Sometimes alone isn't strongest." "Am I the wolf in this story?" "You're learning to be." He handed her the gourd. "Try again. The stitching is too loose." By midday, her fingers were raw, but she'd completed one moccasin. It wasn't pretty, the seams crooked, the leather bunched in places, but it would hold. Takakota examined it with the same serious attention he'd give a warrior's weapon. "It will do. Make the second stronger. Learn from the first." As she worked, he prepared food pine nuts, dried berries, and strips of something she didn't ask about too closely. Her stomach, empty for too long, cramped at the first bites. "Slowly," he warned. Another lesson: feast and famine are partners in the desert. Eat like you might not eat tomorrow, but not so much you can't run today. Always running, she murmured. Is that what survival means? Sometimes running, sometimes hiding, sometimes fighting. He chewed thoughtfully, knowing which that's wisdom. What about justice? When does that come? His expression darkened. When you're strong enough to take it without dying. They moved camp that afternoon. Sarah's new moccasins were clumsy but quieter than boots on the rocky ground. Takakota led her through a maze of arroyos and hidden paths, pointing out landmarks, a twisted juniper that marked water, a rock formation that showed direction, plants that healed and plants that killed. You're going too fast, she protested after an hour, breath coming short. I can't remember it all. Not trying to remember, just see. Let the land teach you. He paused at a narrow canyon entrance. Through here. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, no more than 100 yards across. A spring bubbled from the rocks, feeding a small pool bordered by cottonwoods. Ancient paintings covered the eastern wall hunters and spirits and symbols she couldn't read. Sacred place. Takakota said quietly. Old. Before my people even, but the spirits are peaceful here. Sarah sank gratefully beside the pool, cupping water to wash the dust from her face. It's beautiful. Beautiful keeps no one alive, but water does. Shelter does. He pointed to a natural overhang. We stay here tonight, tomorrow, maybe longer, depends. On what? On how fast you learn, on whether Creech's men search this far, on many things. He began gathering wood. Help me. Dry branches, only less smoke. As they worked, Sarah asked, Your sister, tell me about her. His movement slowed. Why? Because she matters to you. Because I want to understand. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Ayana means eternal blossom. 15 summers when taken. Smarter than me. Wanted to learn the white man's writing. Said it was another kind of power. Did she learn? Some missionary's wife taught her before the soldiers made them leave. A ghost of a smile. She taught me too. Said brothers shouldn't be stupider than sisters. Despite herself, Sarah smiled back. She sounds formidable. Like storm in mountains. Beautiful and dangerous both. The smile faded. The raiders came during gathering time, women and children away from camp. I was hunting, too far to help. It wasn't your fault. No. He placed wood with unnecessary force. I should have been there. Should have tracked faster. Should have... He stopped, visibly pulling back from the edge of that darkness. Should have doesn't bring anyone back. They worked in silence until the fire was built, as shadows lengthened. Takakota showed her how to set snares, how to read weather in cloud formations, how to find direction by stars. Sarah's hands grew steadier, her movements more confident. You learn quickly, he observed as she successfully lit a fire with flint and steel. Most whites need many more tries. Most whites haven't had their world burned down around them. She fed twigs to the growing flame. Amazing how fast you learn when the alternative is death. Truth, he settled across from her. But also something else. You have iron inside. Not all do. I don't feel strong. I feel... She searched for words. Hollowed out, like the wind could blow through me. Hollow can be filled again. Broken. He shrugged. Broken stays broken. They ate in companionable quiet as stars emerged overhead. The valley felt separate from the world, a pocket of peace in a violent land. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her unlikely teacher the way firelight played across his features. How his hands moved with such certain grace. Tomorrow, he said suddenly, I teach you weapons. I don't know if I could kill anyone. Then you'll die, and whoever depends on you dies too. His voice was flat, matter of fact. The desert has no mercy, neither do men like Creech. You've killed to protect, to survive. not for pleasure, not for glory. He met her eyes. Each death marks you, but sometimes not killing marks you worse. Sarah shivered despite the fire's warmth. My father had a gun. He never got to draw it. Gun is good. Knife is better always loaded. Never jams. He pulled a blade from his boot, shorter than she expected. But first, you learn to move, to think. Weapons are just tools. Mind is the real weapon. You sound like a philosopher. My grandmother again. She had words for everything. His expression softened slightly. Would have liked you, I think. Appreciated your questions. Even though I'm white, color is outside. She cared about inside. He sheathed the knife. Said anyone could be human if they chose. Not all choose. A coyote called in the distance, answered by its pack. The sound raised goosebumps on Sarah's arms. Takakota noticed. Of course, he seemed to notice everything. They won't come close to fire. Another lesson: most predators prefer easy prey. Look difficult, they find easier. What about human predators? Them too, sometimes, other times. He stirred the coals with a stick. Other times, they enjoy the challenge. Like Creech. Like Creech. He looked up at her. In Agua Prieta, there's a man, Don Francisco Mendoza, Mexican official, but honest, hates slavers. If we can reach him, testify about what happened. Would he believe us, an Apache and a woman? Together, maybe. Your word carries weight, mine doesn't. Mine confirms what yours might miss. He smiled grimly. Partnership of convenience. Is that what this is? Something shifted in his expression. Started that way. The words hung between them, loaded with possibility. Sarah looked away first, suddenly aware of their isolation, of how his presence had become oddly comfortable despite everything she'd been taught about his people. I should check my snares, he said abruptly, rising. Rest. Tomorrow will be harder. After he left, Sarah sat watching the fire, mind churning. 3 days ago, she'd been a merchant's daughter with a hope chest and a suitor. Now she wore Apache moccasins and planned testimony against murderers. The transformation felt too large to grasp. But underneath the strangeness, something else stirred. Not attraction, she couldn't afford that, not now, but recognition, perhaps, of someone else shaped by loss, driven by purpose, walking the narrow edge between justice and revenge. When Takakota returned with 2 desert hares, she helped clean them without squeamishness, proud when he nodded approval. They cooked in companionable silence, the meat tough but welcome. Storm coming? He said, reading the sky. 2 days, maybe 3. How can you tell? Wind tastes different. Pressure changes. He pointed to the stars. And those clouds, far south, they'll bring rain. Will we be safe here? From rain, yes, but storms make tracking harder. Creech might move while the trail is obscured. He considered. We should reach Agua Prieta soon, after storm passes. And my testimony, will it be enough? With proof, maybe. Your father's papers, did any survive? Sarah felt her heart skip. I don't know. I didn't think to look. Then we look after storm. He studied her face. It won't be easy. Returning there. Nothing about this is easy. No, but easy makes weak people. He banked the fire carefully. Sleep now. Dawn brings new lessons. Sarah lay back against the smooth stone, watching stars wheel overhead. Somewhere out there, Creech counted his profits and planned new atrocities. Somewhere, families mourned their dead. Somewhere, justice waited to be seized by hands strong enough to grasp it. But here, in this ancient valley, with its painted stories and patient stones, she was learning to be strong enough. One lesson at a time, one day at a time. Tomorrow would bring weapons training and harder truths. But tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that she was no longer alone. no longer helpless. The transformation had begun. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 4 Skeleton Canyon, asterisk, asterisk. The storm had passed 2 nights ago, leaving the desert washed clean and treacherous with flash flood debris. Sarah followed Takakota through a landscape transformed. Arroyos that had been dry gullies now showed signs of violent water, and the familiar trails were obscured by newly deposited sand and gravel. Step where I step, he reminded her for the 10th time. Storm changes everything. Old paths become traps. She nodded, concentrating on matching his footfalls. 10 days of his teaching had hardened her feet and sharpened her awareness. The knife at her belt still felt foreign, but she could draw it smoothly now, could hit a target with thrown stones at 20 paces. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. They'd returned to the massacre site yesterday, approaching carefully in case Creech had left watchers. The scene was worse than her nightmares, bodies scattered by scavengers. Wagons already showing weather damage, but they'd found what they came for. Her father's leather portfolio, overlooked beneath an overturned water barrel, contained surveyor's notes, official railroad correspondence, and most importantly, a detailed map of proposed routes through the Dragoon Mountains, marked with notations about copper deposits. Evidence, Takakota had said simply. But she'd seen the satisfaction in his eyes, proof that the massacre wasn't random violence, but calculated murder. Now they approached Skeleton Canyon from the east, avoiding the main trail. The trading post squatted like a toad against the canyon wall, adobe and rough timber, with smoke rising from a chimney despite the warmth of late morning. "Remember," Takakota murmured, "you're a missionary's daughter, saved by a Christian Apache guide. I work for the mission in San Carlos. Keep the story simple." Sarah touched the plain dress they'd taken from one of the wagon's brown calico. Modest and unremarkable. Her hair was bound severely, her face clean of paint or powder. She looked exactly like what they claimed a godly woman who'd survived through divine providence. "What if they recognize you?" "Some might, but I've traded here before as scout and hunter. The owner, Paulson, cares more for gold than gossip." He adjusted his rifle, visible but not threatening. "Stay close, speak little, watch everything." The trading post's interior was dim and close, thick with the smell of tobacco, whiskey, and unwashed humanity. 3 men sat at a rough table near the back, cards spread between them. A 4th leaned against the bar, tall, lean, with the careful eyes of someone who'd survived by reading danger. Paulson himself stood behind the counter, a heavy-set man with graying whiskers and hands that never strayed far from the shotgun beneath the bar. His eyes narrowed as they entered, flickering between them with professional assessment. "Takakota," not quite greeting, not quite question. "Thought you were scouting for the army." "Sometimes. Today, I guide." He nodded toward Sarah. "Miss Mackenzie, from the Presbyterian Mission, going to Agua Prieta to meet her father." Paulson's gaze lingered on Sarah's face, taking in the healing cuts, the sun damage, the wariness she couldn't quite hide. "Long way for a church woman." "The Lord's work calls us to difficult places," Sarah said softly, pitching her voice higher than natural. "Brother Takakota has been most protective." One of the card players snorted. "Brother Takakota, that's rich." Takakota's expression didn't change. "Mission pays in silver, better than army scrip." "True enough." Paulson seemed to relax slightly. "What do you need?" "Supplies, hardtack, salt, ammunition." Takakota placed coins on the counter. "And information, if you have it. The trails ahead, are they clear?" "Clear enough, though there's been talk." Paulson glanced at the other men, then back. "Trouble up north. Wagon train hit, maybe 2 weeks back. Ugly business." Sarah forced herself not to react, burying her face in study of the goods on the shelves. Takakota merely grunted. "Apaches. That's what some say. Others..." Paulson shrugged. Bodies were stripped, but the killing was too clean, too organized, and nothing taken but papers and such. The lean man at the bar straightened slightly. Papers? So they say, railroad survey stuff, maps. Paulson began measuring out supplies. Course, could just be talk. You know how stories grow. Indeed. The lean man's voice was cultured, Eastern. Though one wonders what savages would want with surveying documents. Sarah felt Takakota tense beside her, though nothing showed in his posture. The lean man was studying them now, pale eyes sharp with interest. Begging your pardon, miss, the man continued. But you look familiar. Have we met? I don't believe so, sir. Sarah kept her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. I've been at the mission since spring. Of course, my mistake. But his eyes said otherwise. He pushed away from the bar, movements lazy but purposeful. Heading to Agua Prieta, you said, Lord willing. Sarah murmured. Dangerous country for missionaries, even with protection. The pause before the last word was deliberate, insulting. Perhaps you should consider returning to safer territories. The Lord protects his servants, she replied. Does he? How fortunate. The man touched his hat brim. Safe travels. Miss Brother Takakota. He sauntered out, but Sarah caught his gesture to one of the card players, subtle, but clear. The player folded his hand and followed, trying to look casual. Paulson had seen it too. His eyes met Takakota's briefly. That's Marcus Reed, he said quietly. Works for important people, asks questions, finds answers. What kind of people? Takakota kept his voice neutral. The kind that pay well for information. Paulson finished wrapping their supplies. The kind that don't like loose ends. They completed their transaction in tense silence as they prepared to leave. Paulson added, There's another trail. Old Apache path. Goes over the ridge. Harder, but more. Private. Takakota nodded understanding. Appreciated. Outside, Sarah waited until they were well away from the post before speaking. He knew. That Reed man, he recognized me. Yes. Takakota led her quickly toward the canyon mouth. We have maybe an hour before they move. Less if they have horses nearby. Should we run? No. Running confirms suspicion. We take Paulson's advice, the high trail. He glanced back, reading signs invisible to her. They'll expect us to run for Agua Prieta. Instead, we circle back, approach from the south. The old trail was brutal. What had been difficult terrain below became a nightmare of loose shale and crumbling ledges. Sarah's moccasins, so superior to boots on level ground, struggled for purchase on the steep grade. Thorny ocotillo tore at her dress, and the afternoon sun turned the canyon into an oven. Can't go much further, she gasped after 2 hours of climbing. You will. Takakota didn't slow. Reed is Creech's man. I've heard the name before he finds people who don't want finding. That gave her strength for another mile. As they crested a particularly vicious switchback, Takakota suddenly pushed her behind a boulder. Below, far down the main trail, dust clouds marked riders moving fast toward Agua Prieta. 4 men, he observed. They'll reach the town road in 3 hours. Set up watch. Then we're trapped. No, we rest here until dark, then take the goat paths down. Longer, but they won't expect it. He studied the sky. Moon sets early tonight. That helps us. They found shelter in a wind-carved hollow, barely more than a depression in the cliff face. Sarah collapsed against the stone, every muscle screaming. Takakota handed her the water gourd, watching to ensure she drank slowly. You did well, he said finally. Many warriors couldn't make that climb. I don't feel like a warrior. I feel like I'm dying. Same thing, sometimes. He produced dried meat from his pack. Eat. Night travel needs strength. As shadows lengthened across the canyon, Sarah asked, "What happens if they catch us?" "They won't. But if they do..." He was quiet for a moment. "Then we fight and likely die, but we make them pay for it." "That's not very comforting." "Comfort is for safe places. We're not in a safe place." He checked his rifle, counting cartridges. "But dying while fighting for justice, there are worse endings." "I'd prefer living for justice." "Then stay quiet and move fast tonight." As darkness fell, they began their descent. The goat paths were generous in name-only narrow ledges where one misplaced step meant a fall into blackness. Sarah found herself grabbing at rocks, thorny plants, anything to steady herself. Behind her, Takakota moved like a ghost, occasionally steadying her with a hand at her back. Halfway down, voices drifted up from below. Sarah froze, pressing against the cliff face. A campfire flickered near the main trail sentries, watching for them. Takakota's lips were at her ear. "Don't look at the fire. Ruins night vision. Follow my feet." They crept past, every loose pebble sounding like an avalanche in Sarah's ears. The voices continued, unalarmed. "Waste of time. They're probably halfway to Mexico by now." "Reed says different. Says the woman's the key. Witness to the whole thing." "If she survived. A lot of bodies out there." "Reed's sure. And what Reed wants, Reed gets. You know what Creech does to people who disappoint him." Sarah's blood chilled at the casual mention of Creech's name, confirmation of what they'd suspected, but hearing it spoken so openly made it real in a different way. They were past the sentries now, working their way down the last steep section. Sarah's legs shook with exhaustion, and twice she slipped, saved only by Takakota's quick reflexes. When they finally reached level ground, she wanted to weep with relief. "No rest yet," he warned. "We need distance before dawn." They moved through the desert darkness, navigating by stars and instinct. Sarah focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trusting Takakota's guidance. Somewhere behind them, Reed's men watched empty roads, somewhere ahead. Agua Prieta offered the hope of justice. As the eastern sky began to pale, Takakota finally called a halt. They'd covered maybe 15 miles, not enough to be safe, but enough to have options. He found them shelter in a cluster of boulders topped by a lone mesquite tree. "Sleep," he ordered. "I'll watch." "You need rest too." "I'll rest when you're safe in Agua Prieta." He positioned himself where he could see their back trail. Reed made a mistake, showing his hand. "Now we know they're hunting us specifically." "Is that good?" "It means we have something they fear. Your testimony. Your father's papers." He smiled grimly. "Fear makes men stupid. Stupid men are easier to beat." Sarah curled against a sun-warmed stone, exhaustion pulling at her like quicksand. But before sleep took her, she murmured, "Takakota, what you did today keeping me going when I wanted to quit? What about it?" "Thank you." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "Warriors don't quit. Neither do you. Remember that." As she drifted off, Sarah held on to those words like a talisman. She wasn't a missionary's daughter or a merchant's child anymore. She was something harder, forged in desert heat and desperate flight. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new tests, but tonight she'd survived Skeleton Canyon and the hunters who waited there. One more small victory in a war that was only beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 5, Agua Prieta, Fragile Alliance, asterisk, asterisk. The church bells of Agua Prieta announced evening mass as Sarah and Takakota approached from the south. They'd spent 2 days circling wide, avoiding roads and known trails. Now, dust-covered and weary, they paused at the edge of town to assess their situation. "Remember," Takakota said quietly, "Don Francisco Mendoza lives near the plaza. White house with blue shutters. His wife Maria was taken by slavers. 10 years ago he returned her. but she died of the shame. He hates men like Creech. Sarah adjusted her shawl, trying to look respectable despite days of hard travel. What if Reed's men are already here? Then we learn it quickly. He scanned the quiet streets. Stay close. If trouble comes, get inside the church. Even Creech's men won't violate sanctuary. They entered town as the last vendors were closing their market stalls. A few curious glances followed them. An Apache and a white woman made an unusual pair, but no one challenged their passage. The plaza was dominated by the Church of San Antonio, its adobe walls glowing pink in the sunset. Don Francisco's house stood exactly as described. Before they could knock, the door opened to reveal a small, fierce-looking woman with silver-streaked hair. "You're the ones from the north," she said without preamble. "Come, quickly." Inside, the house was cool and dim, furnished with simple elegance. Don Francisco Mendoza rose from behind a desk, a man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and careful hands. His gaze moved between them, assessing. "Senora Esperanza saw you from the market," he explained. "She said you moved like people being hunted." "We are," Takakota said simply, "by men who murdered 47 people for railroad papers." Don Francisco's expression hardened. "Tell me." For the next hour. Sarah recounted the massacre, her voice steady despite the memories it stirred. She produced her father's portfolio, spreading the maps and documents across Don Francisco's desk. The Mexican official studied them with growing interest. These routes, they would save the railroad millions. And these copper deposits, he looked up sharply. Men have killed for far less. You say the leader was scarred. Josiah Creech, Takakota confirmed. You know him. By reputation. He sells information to both sides of the border. Also sells people when profit allows. Don Francisco's jaw tightened. Last year, 3 families disappeared from villages south of here. Creech's name was whispered, but we had no proof. "We can give you proof," Sarah said urgently. "My testimony is worth little in American courts. A woman's word against established men." Don Francisco shook his head. "But combined with these documents, with proper legal pressure..." A knock at the door interrupted him. Senora Esperanza entered, face troubled. "Francisco, there are strangers at Hernandez's cantina, Americanos, asking questions about an Apache and a white woman." Sarah's heart sank. "They found us." "Not yet," Don Francisco said calmly. "Maria, prepare the back room. Our guests will stay tonight." He turned to Sarah and Takakota. "Tomorrow, I ride to Fort Huachuca. The commander there, Colonel Morrison, is an honest man. With these documents and your testimony, he'll have to act." "What about Reed's men?" Takakota asked. "My town, my people." Don Francisco smiled grimly. "They'll find no welcome here." As if to underscore his words, church bells began ringing, not the regular call to mass, but an urgent clanging that brought people into the streets. Through the window, Sarah saw men emerging from houses, some carrying farm tools, others with old muskets. "The bell is our warning," Senora Esperanza explained. "When slavers come, when trouble threatens, we stand together." "But we don't want to bring violence to your town," Sarah protested. "Violence came here long before you." Don Francisco said, "Now go with Maria. Rest, eat. Tomorrow we begin the fight for justice." The back room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking a courtyard. Senora Esperanza brought them food beans, tortillas, and strong coffee that made Sarah almost weep with gratitude. "You're safe here," the older woman said firmly. "My husband's men watch the house, and the town watches the strangers." After she left, Sarah and Takakota sat in awkward silence. The enforced intimacy of their flight had given way to the strange formality of civilization. Sarah found herself acutely aware of his presence in the small room. of the inappropriate nature of their arrangement. "I can sleep in the courtyard," he offered, reading her discomfort. "No, we stay together. If they come, they won't. Not tonight." He moved to the window, watching the darkening sky. "Don Francisco has power here. Real power, not just guns and threats. The power of community. Yes, something Creech doesn't understand." He turned back to her. "Your people could learn from this." "My people," Sarah bristled slightly. "You mean whites?" "I mean Americans, always alone, even in your towns. Here, they stand together." She couldn't argue with that. In the settlements she'd known, neighbors might help with barn raising or harvest. But when trouble came, most looked to their own interests first. "Your sister," she said, changing the subject. "Do you think she might have been brought through here?" His expression softened with pain. "Maybe Don Francisco would know he keeps records of all the disappeared." He sat on the other bed, suddenly looking exhausted. 5 years is a long time. She might be— "Don't," Sarah said firmly. "Don't give up hope. Not until you know for certain. Hope is dangerous. It keeps you looking backward instead of forward." "Then what keeps you searching?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Duty, love, guilt." He looked at her directly. "The same things that drive you to seek justice for your family. Is that what this is, or is it revenge? What's the difference?" "Justice rebuilds. Revenge only destroys." "Pretty words." His voice carried an edge of bitterness. "Tell me that again when you face Creech, when you have the chance to end him." Sarah had no answer for that. The thought of confronting the scarred man who'd orchestrated such slaughter made her stomach twist with fear and rage in equal measure. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Señora Esperanza entered with a basin of hot water and clean clothes. "You'll want to wash before sleeping, and these will fit better than that torn dress." The clothes were simple but well made, a white blouse and dark skirt that any respectable woman might wear. Sarah accepted them gratefully, then looked pointedly at Takakota. He took the hint, stepping into the courtyard to give her privacy. Through the window, she could see him speaking quietly with one of Don Francisco's men, planning and preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring. The hot water felt like heaven on her battered skin. She washed away days of trail dust and fierce sweat, careful around her healing wounds. The new clothes transformed her from desperate survivor back into something resembling a proper woman. When Takakota returned, he stopped short at the sight of her. "You look different. Like them. Like you belong in their world." There was something unreadable in his voice loss, perhaps, or recognition of a distance growing between them. "It's just clothes," she said softly. "Nothing is just anything. Everything has meaning." He moved past her to wash his own face and hands. "Tomorrow you speak to soldiers, to lawyers. You'll need to be their kind of woman. Proper, delicate, believable. And you, I'll be what I always am, the Apache who knows too much." He dried his face with savage efficiency. "They'll listen to you because you're white. They'll doubt me because I'm not. That's the trade we make for justice." Sarah wanted to protest, to say things would be different, but she knew he was right. The world they were entering had rules as rigid as desert survival, just different ones. Through the night, she dozed fitfully, aware of every sound, footsteps in the street, dogs barking, the creak of the house settling. Once, she woke to find Takakota sitting by the window, rifle across his knees, standing watch as he had in the cave that first night. "Sleep," she whispered. "Don Francisco's men—" "Watch the outside. I watch you." He didn't turn from the window. "It's what I do now." The simple statement carried weight she wasn't ready to examine. She closed her eyes, feigning sleep, but remained aware of his presence, protector, teacher, something more complicated than either. Dawn brought commotion. Through the window, They could see riders gathering in the plaza Don Francisco's men, armed and ready. The Mexican official himself appeared in their doorway, dressed for hard travel. "Reed's men made a mistake last night," he reported with satisfaction. "Got drunk at the cantina, started asking too many questions. My people convinced them you'd gone south to Hermosillo. They left before dawn, riding hard." "That won't fool them for long," Takakota warned. "Long enough. I leave for Fort Huachuca within the hour. Colonel Morrison will want to speak with you both." He handed Sarah a sealed letter. "For Marshal Samuel Morrison in Tucson, the colonel's brother. A good man who takes the law seriously." "You trust easily," Takakota observed. "No, but I trust what I see." Don Francisco met his gaze steadily. "A man who protects a woman at risk to himself, who seeks justice rather than random vengeance. That man has honor, Apache or not." After he left, Sarah and Takakota prepared for their own departure. The plan was simple. They would wait 2 days, letting Reed's men chase shadows south, then take the main road to Tucson under the protection of a freight wagon convoy. Those 2 days passed in strange suspension. By day, Sarah helped Senora Esperanza with household tasks, finding comfort in normal women's work. By night, she and Takakota talked quietly in their room about the trail ahead, about justice and law, about everything except the growing connection between them. On the last night, as they prepared to leave with the morning convoy, Takakota handed her something wrapped in soft leather. Inside was a knife, smaller than his, with a handle of polished antler. "For protection," he said simply, "you're giving me a weapon." "No, I'm giving you a choice." He showed her how to wear it concealed but accessible. "When the moment comes, and it will come, you'll decide what justice means to you." Sarah traced the blade with one finger, understanding the weight of what he offered. Not just steel, but agency, the power to defend herself, to choose her own path when law and revenge intersected. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the knife. He nodded, understanding that too. Tomorrow they would enter the world of courts and lawyers, testimonies and evidence. But tonight, in this small room in a Mexican border town, they were simply two people bound by tragedy and purpose, preparing for a fight that would test everything they'd learned about survival. The church bells rang midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Sarah lay in the darkness, hand on the knife at her side, and thought about justice and choices, about the price of both. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6. Tucson Law and Rumors, asterisk, asterisk. Marshal Samuel Morrison's office occupied a corner of the old Presidio, its thick adobe walls still bearing scars from Apache raids decades past. Sarah sat very straight in the hard wooden chair, her father's portfolio clasped in her lap, while Takakota stood by the window close enough to protect, far enough to seem properly differential. Morrison himself was nothing like his military brother at Fort Huachuca, where Colonel Morrison was ramrod straight and silver-haired. Samuel was stocky and weathered, with shrewd eyes that had seen too much of frontier justice to believe in simple stories. "Miss Mackenzie," he said after studying Don Francisco's letter for the 3rd time. "What you're alleging the systematic murder of 47 people, including women and children, that's a serious accusation." "It's not an allegation, Marshal. It's what I witnessed." Sarah kept her voice steady despite the memories clawing at her throat. "They killed everyone for these papers." She opened the portfolio, spreading the maps and surveys across Morrison's desk. His expression sharpened as he recognized official railroad seals, government stamps. These routes would be worth a fortune to the right people, he admitted. "And these copper deposits?" He looked up. "Who else knows about this?" "The killers. Josiah Creech specifically, I heard his name. Saw his scarred face." She glanced at Takakota. "And we believe they're connected to slave trading operations across the border." Morrison's gaze shifted to Takakota. "You're the Apache who brought her in." "I found her. Helped her survive. Takakota's voice was neutral, careful. I've tracked Creech's men before. They take our people, sell them in Sonora. And you can identify these men testify in court. A ghost of bitter smile crossed Takakota's face. Would my word matter in your court? Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. With Miss Mackenzie's testimony, with these documents, it would help. Then I'll speak your truth in your way. Takakota straightened slightly. But Creech has men everywhere, even here. Not in my office, Morrison said firmly. Judge Thornberry is expecting us. He'll take your depositions, issue warrants. But I'll be honest, Creech has money, connections. This won't be easy. The walk to the courthouse drew stares. Sarah, in her respectable Mexican clothes, flanked by a U.S. Marshal and an Apache warrior, made a curious sight. She heard whispers, saw women pull their children closer, men's hands drift toward weapons. Judge Lucius Thornberry was 70 if he was a day, with wild white whiskers and eyes like a hawk. His chambers smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, law books climbing the walls like fortifications against chaos. Sit, he commanded, barely glancing at them. Morrison, what mess have you brought me now? For 2 hours. Sarah told her story while a clerk's pen scratched across paper. Every detail, every horror, laid out in the precise language of law. When she finished, her throat was raw and her hands trembled in her lap. The Apache, Thornberry said without looking at Takakota. What's his part in this? He saved my life, Sarah said before anyone else could speak. Taught me to survive, brought me to safety. Without him, Creech would have succeeded in leaving no witnesses. The judge finally looked at Takakota directly. You're not San Carlos Reservation. Chiricahua, free band. Free. Thornberry chewed the word like tobacco. Not many of those left. Why help her? Because it was right. Takakota met the judge's stare steadily. Because men who murder for profit are everyone's enemy. Pretty sentiment. Question is, will it hold in court? Thornberry turned back to Morrison. You'll need more than one woman's word and an Apache's testimony. Get me physical evidence. Other witnesses, if any, survived. Financial records showing motive. Then maybe we have a case. Outside the courthouse, Sarah felt deflated. He didn't believe us. He believed, Morrison corrected. But believing and proving are different animals. I'm sending men to the massacre site tomorrow. See what evidence remains. Meanwhile, you both need somewhere safe to stay. I have arrangements, Sarah said quickly. Too quickly, judging by Morrison's raised eyebrow. Miss Mackenzie, propriety matters here. A young woman traveling with an unmarried man. Even given the circumstances, I've been staying with the widow Martinez, Sarah lied smoothly, naming a respectable boarding house she'd noticed earlier. Mr. Takakota camps outside town, as is proper. Morrison looked skeptical, but didn't press. See that you do. Tucson's a small town, and talk spreads fast. Don't give Creech's lawyers any ammunition about your character. As Morrison left to organize the investigation, Sarah and Takakota stood awkwardly on the courthouse steps. The fiction she'd created suddenly felt real. They couldn't be seen together without damaging her credibility. The creek south of town, Takakota said quietly. Where the cottonwoods grow thick. I'll camp there. That's not right. After everything doesn't matter to them. Only what looks proper. His expression was carefully blank. You know where to find me if needed. That night, Sarah did take a room at Widow Martinez's boarding house, enduring the proprietress's probing questions about her terrible ordeal and her Christian Apache guide. The bed was soft, the room clean, but she found herself missing the hard ground and star-filled skies of their journey. By the third day, the whispers had started. Sarah heard them at the general store, in the boarding house parlor, on the street corners where proper ladies gathered. living with savages for weeks. Says he saved her, but you know what those Apache do to white women. No decent man will have her now. Mark my words. The cruelest whispers came from Mrs. Augusta Whitman, wife of a prominent merchant and self-appointed guardian of Tucson's moral standards. Sarah encountered her outside the millinery shop, surrounded by her circle of followers like a queen holding court. "Miss Mackenzie," Mrs. Whitman's voice dripped false sympathy. "How brave of you to show your face in town after such experiences." "I have nothing to be ashamed of," Sarah replied evenly. "Of course not, dear, though one does wonder why the Apache kept you so long. Surely a Christian settlement was closer than Tucson." "Mr. Takakota saved my life at great personal risk. He deserves gratitude, not suspicion." Mr. Takakota." Mrs. Whitman's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "How progressive. Though I suppose when one has spent so much time in such intimate circumstances, formality does break down." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "If you have something to say, Mrs. Whitman, say it plainly. I'm merely concerned for your reputation. Dear, a young woman's virtue is so fragile, so easily questioned, especially when she chooses to continue associating with her rescuer, even after reaching civilization." "I haven't," Sarah began, then stopped. Defending herself would only feed the gossip. "Haven't you, Mrs. Whitman's smile was sharp as a blade. "I heard you were seen walking toward the creek yesterday evening. Such an isolated spot. So many cottonwoods to provide." Privacy. Sarah's hands clenched in her skirts, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Ladies." Dr. Marcus Reed tipped his hat. The same man they'd encountered at Skeleton Canyon. "Forgive the interruption, Miss Mackenzie. Might I have a word?" Sarah's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm afraid I have an appointment. With Marshal Morrison. Yes, I know." Reed's smile was pleasant, his eyes cold. "I'll walk you there. These streets can be dangerous for a woman alone." Trapped by propriety. Sarah could only nod. As Reed took her arm, Mrs. Whitman called after them. "Do be careful, dear. So many dangers in this world." Reed guided her away from the main street, his grip firm on her elbow. Remarkable woman, Mrs. Whitman, so concerned with everyone's welfare. "What do you want?" "Direct. I like that." He steered her into an alley between buildings. "What I want is simple. Those papers your father died protecting, they're causing unnecessary fuss. My employer would like to purchase them generously. They're not for sale." "Everything's for sale. Your testimony, for instance. Amazing how memory can fade when confronted with certain pressures." His grip tightened. "You've been traveling with an Apache, alone, for weeks. Do you really think any jury will believe you weren't compromised?" Sarah tried to pull away, but he held fast. "Let go of me." "In a moment. First, understand this: my employer is not a patient man. He's already unhappy about the attention you've brought. Continue this foolish crusade, and things will become unpleasant, not just for you, but for your Apache friend." "Is that a threat?" "An observation. Apaches who kill white men tend to hang, regardless of circumstances. All it takes is the right witness, the right story." He released her arm. "Think about it. Miss Mackenzie, take the money. Leave town. Live comfortably somewhere far away. Everyone wins. Everyone except the 47 people Creech murdered." Reed's expression hardened. 48 is just as easy as 47. Remember that." He tipped his hat and strolled away, leaving Sarah shaking with rage and fear. She wanted to run to the creek to warn Takakota, but knew that was exactly what Reed expected. Instead, she walked steadily to Morrison's office. The marshal listened to her report with deepening concern. "Reed's getting bold. Means Creech is worried." He drummed his fingers on his desk. "My men found the massacre site. What was left of it. Someone had been there first, scattered the remains, destroyed evidence, but they found this." He produced a cavalry button, torn from a uniform. 7th Cavalry. Reported stolen from Fort Grant last month along with other supplies. "We're building a case. Miss Mackenzie, but it's delicate." "How long?" "Another week, maybe 2. We need—" He broke off as shouts erupted outside. Through the window, they saw a crowd gathering near the plaza. "Now what?" Morrison grabbed his hat and gun belt. In the plaza, they found chaos. 2 cowboys were dragging something behind their horses, a body, Sarah realized with horror. As they drew closer, she recognized one of Don Francisco's men who'd ridden with them from Agua Prieta. "Found him on the road," one cowboy announced. "Apache work, by the look of it." But Sarah saw what others missed. The wounds were too precise, too calculated. This was meant to look like Apache violence, but it was white men's work. "Where's Takakota?" Morrison muttered, scanning the crowd. Sarah's heart sank as she spotted him emerging from the trading post. He took in the scene, the body, the angry crowd, the perfect trap closing around him. "There's the Apache," someone shouted. "Probably killed him for helping whites." The crowd surged forward. Takakota's hand moved toward his knife, then stopped. Fighting would only confirm their suspicions, but not fighting might mean death anyway. Sarah pushed through the crowd, ignoring Morrison's sharp call. She reached Takakota just as the first men closed in. "Stop!" She positioned herself between him and the mob. "This man is under Marshal Morrison's protection. He's a witness in a federal investigation." "Witness, Mrs." Whitman's voice cut through the noise. "Or accomplice. How convenient that violence follows wherever he goes." "The violence follows Creech's money," Sarah shot back. "This is murder disguised as Apache work. Look at the wounds what Apache uses a stiletto." Morrison had reached them now, gun drawn. "Everyone back. This is Marshall's business." The crowd reluctantly gave ground, but Sarah could feel their hostility like heat from a fire. She stayed close to Takakota as Morrison examined the body. "She's right," the marshal announced. "These aren't Apache wounds. This man was murdered to send a message or start a riot." He looked hard at the crowd. "Anyone who takes justice into their own hands will answer to me." Gradually, the plaza cleared, people drifting away with muttered threats and suspicious glares. Morrison turned to Takakota. "You need to leave town, tonight." "I won't run." Takakota's voice was stone. "That's what they want." "What they want is you dead and her discredited." Morrison glanced at Sarah. "Both of you, come with me. We need a new plan." As they walked back to his office, Sarah felt the weight of eyes on them, Reed's men, Mrs. Whitman's gossips. Ordinary citizens turned suspicious by fear and prejudice. "I'm sorry," she murmured to Takakota. "This is my fault." "No, this is Creech's doing." He met her eyes briefly. "But Morrison's right. We need a new plan." That night, ignoring propriety and danger alike, Sarah slipped out of the boarding house and made her way to the creek. She found Takakota's camp by the small fire's glow, his rifle across his knees. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. "I know." She sat beside him anyway. "But I couldn't let you think you were alone in this." "I've been alone before." "Not anymore." She stared into the fire. "Reed offered to buy me off today. Threatened you if I didn't comply. You should consider it." She turned sharply. "What?" "Taking his offer. Leaving." His profile was harsh in the firelight. "This isn't your fight anymore. You've given your testimony. Let the law handle the rest." "The law needs both of us. You know that." "The law needs evidence and respectability. I provide neither. He finally looked at her. But you could still have a life, somewhere else, where these whispers can't follow. What kind of life built on the blood of 47 people funded by the man who murdered them? She shook her head fiercely. I'd rather die. You might. We both might. Then at least we'd die for something worthwhile. They sat in silence, the creek murmuring beside them, stars wheeling overhead. Finally, Takakota spoke. My grandmother would have liked you. She valued courage over comfort. Tell me about her. So he did. Stories of a wise woman who'd survived the destruction of her world and taught her grandson to walk between two cultures without losing himself to either. Sarah found herself leaning closer, drawn by his voice and the glimpse of the man beneath the warrior's mask. When he finished, she impulsively took his hand. We'll see this through, together. His fingers tightened around hers just for a moment before pulling away. Together, then, but carefully. They're watching for any excuse to destroy your credibility. I don't care about my credibility. You should. It's the only weapon you have that I don't. He stood, pulling her up with him. Go back. Be their proper white woman. Let them think you've learned your place. And you, I'll be what I've always been, the shadow at the edge of their world. He touched her face gently, an echo of that first night in the cave. But I'll be watching. Always. Sarah made her way back through dark streets, heart pounding with more than fear. At the boarding house, she found Mrs. Martinez waiting, lamp in hand and disapproval etched on her features. Young woman, if you cannot observe proper behavior, you'll need to find other lodgings. I apologize. I couldn't sleep and thought a walk would help. A walk to the creek at midnight. The widow's expression softened slightly. Child, I know you've been through trials, but this town has rules. Break them, and not even Marshal Morrison can protect you. Sarah nodded, playing the chastened girl, even as her mind raced with plans. Tomorrow, Morrison would send his report to Fort Huachuca. Judge Thornberry would issue warrants. The legal machinery would grind forward, slow but inexorable. But tonight had proven that Creech wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. He'd strike first, using prejudice and fear as weapons sharper than any blade. As she lay in her narrow bed, Sarah touched the knife Takakota had given her, hidden beneath her pillow. Justice was coming, one way or another. The only question was whether they'd survive to see it. Outside, a coyote howled, and somewhere in the darkness, an Apache warrior kept watch over a town that feared and hated him, protecting a woman whose reputation he was destroying simply by existing. The price of justice, Sarah was learning, was higher than she'd imagined, but some things were worth any price. Even scandal, even death, even the loss of a world that had never truly been hers anyway. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight, she held on to the memory of his hand in hers, and found strength in the promise of together. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7, Dawn of Smoke, asterisk, asterisk. The attack came with the first pale light of dawn, when the desert cold still clung to the earth and most of Tucson slept. Sarah woke to the sound of running feet and shouting voices, her hand instinctively finding the knife beneath her pillow. Fire at the creek. Her blood turned to ice. She threw on her dress, not bothering with proper lacing, and ran barefoot into the street. Other boarders were emerging, some in nightclothes, all drawn by the column of black smoke rising from the cottonwoods south of town. Indians, someone shouted. The Apache's finally shown his true colors. Sarah pushed through the growing crowd, her bare feet bleeding from rocks and thorns. The smoke grew thicker as she approached the creek, and through it she could see flames, not a wildfire, but something deliberate, controlled, a camp burning. Takakota! She plunged through the smoke, coughing, searching. She found him by the water's edge, knife in hand, facing 5 men, His shirt was torn, blood seeping from a gash on his ribs. The remains of his camp smoldered behind him, blankets, supplies, everything destroyed. "Should have run when you had the chance. Apache," one of the men sneered. Sarah recognized him from the saloon. One of Reed's crew. "Now you'll burn like you burned those settlers up north." "What settlers?" Takakota's voice was steady despite his wounds. "When?" "Don't play dumb. Family of 5, killed last night. Apache arrows in their backs." The man smiled coldly. "Convenient. You being the only Apache around here." Sarah understood instantly. Another frame. Another murder blamed on Takakota. Creech was accelerating his plan, forcing a confrontation before the legal system could act. "He was here all night," she said loudly, stepping out of the smoke. "I can testify to that." The men turned, surprised. Their leader's smile widened. "Well now, Miss Mackenzie, come to defend your Apache lover. That'll play real well at the trial. The only trial will be yours, for murder and conspiracy." She moved closer to Takakota, letting them see the knife in her hand. "Marshal Morrison is dealing with dead settlers and won't be here for an hour." The man took a step forward. "Lot can happen in an hour." That's when Sarah heard it. Horses approaching fast, lots of them. Not from town, but from the east. The thunder of hooves grew louder, and through the smoke burst Marshal Morrison with a dozen armed riders. "Federal marshals," Morrison roared. "Everyone freeze." The scene crystallized, Reed's men caught between the creek and the arriving lawmen. Takakota bleeding but ready to fight. Sarah standing her ground with a knife she barely knew how to use. For a heartbeat, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then one of Reed's men went for his gun. The morning exploded. Gunfire cracked across the creek. Smoke from black powder mixing with smoke from the burning camp. Sarah found herself on the ground, Takakota's body shielding hers as bullets whined overhead. "Stay down!" he hissed, then rolled away, his rifle appearing in his hands like magic. The fight was brief but vicious. Morrison's men had the advantage of numbers and preparation, but Reed's crew fought with the desperation of cornered animals. Sarah saw one marshal fall, clutching his shoulder. Another went down near the cottonwoods. Then, through the chaos, she saw him, Josiah Creech himself, mounted on a black horse at the edge of the tree line. The scar on his face was livid in the morning light, his eyes scanning the battlefield with cold calculation. Their eyes met across the smoke and violence. He smiled, touching his hat brim in mock salute, then spurred his horse straight at her. Sarah scrambled to her feet, knife ready, knowing it was useless against a mounted man. But Takakota was already moving, placing himself between her and the charging horse. His rifle cracked once, catching Creech's mount in the shoulder. The horse screamed, stumbling, throwing its rider. Creech rolled as he hit the ground, coming up with a pistol aimed at Takakota. Sarah saw it happening as if in slow motion, the hammer drawing back. Takakota's rifle empty. No time to reload. She didn't remember throwing the knife. One moment it was in her hand. The next it was buried in Creech's shoulder. Spinning him around, his shot went wide, and then Morrison's men were on him, bearing him to the ground. "Sarah!" Takakota caught her as her knees buckled, the reaction hitting all at once. "Are you hurt?" "No, She stared at Creech, writhing on the ground with her knife still in his shoulder. "I actually hit him." "Good throw." There was pride in his voice, and something else, relief so profound it made his hands shake where they held her. "When I saw him charging at you, you protected me, again." "We protected each other." He winced, hand going to his ribs. The blood was flowing more freely now, his adrenaline fading. "Medic," Sarah called, supporting his weight. "He needs help." Dr. Marcus Webb, Tucson's only qualified physician, pushed through the crowd that had gathered. His bag was already open, hands steady despite the chaos around them. Knife wound, looks like, he said, examining Takakota's ribs. Clean but deep. Need to stitch this properly. He glanced at Sarah. Can you assist my nurses tending the marshals? Sarah nodded, helping Takakota to a flat rock away from the worst of the smoke. As Dr. Webb worked, she held Takakota's hand, feeling him tense with each stitch but never crying out. Brave man, Webb murmured. Most would be screaming by now. Pain is just the body talking, Takakota said through gritted teeth. Sometimes it has nothing useful to say. Morrison approached as Webb finished, his face grim but satisfied. We got 4 of them dead, 2 captured, including Creech. He'll live to hang, thanks to your knife. Miss Mackenzie. The family they killed. No family. We checked. They burned an abandoned cabin, planted some bodies from the massacre site. Morrison spat in disgust. Trying to frame your friend here for their own crimes. So it's over. Sarah could hardly believe it. The gunfight's over. The legal battle's just beginning. Morrison studied them both. You two all right? Sarah looked at Takakota, shirt bloodied but eyes clear, then at herself, barefoot, disheveled, covered in smoke and dirt. We're alive. That's what counts. Morrison turned to his men. Get these prisoners secured. I want statements from everyone while memories are fresh. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning cold. The crowd of townspeople had grown, drawn by gunfire and drama. Sarah saw Mrs. Whitman among them, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, disappointment that the scandal hadn't played out as expected, mixed with morbid fascination at the violence. Miss Mackenzie. Doctor. Webb finished packing his bag. Your friend needs rest and care. The boarding house. Won't take an Apache, Sarah finished. I know. My office has a back room, Webb offered quietly. I've tended Apache before, when they'd trade herbs for treatment. He can recover there. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for the small kindness. As they helped Takakota to his feet, she noticed Reed wasn't among the dead or captured. Marshal Marcus Reed. Escaped in the confusion. We'll find him. Morrison's jaw tightened. Man like that can't hide forever. At Webb's office, they settled Takakota on a cot in the back room. The doctor provided clean water and bandages, then tactfully withdrew. Sarah found herself alone with Takakota for the first time since the violence. You threw your knife for me, he said softly. You stood between me and a charging horse. She dipped a cloth in water, gently cleaning the smoke and blood from his face. Seems we're even. We'll never be even. I owe you too much. You owe me nothing. We're. She searched for the word. Partners. His hand caught hers, stilling the cloth. Is that all? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they couldn't say. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but before she could answer, voices erupted outside. Demands to see the prisoner as his attorney. Sarah recognized the oleaginous tone immediately. Hamilton Bradshaw, Tucson's most expensive lawyer, who'd defended every wealthy criminal in the territory. Of course Creech has a lawyer already, she said bitterly. Money talks, even from a jail cell. Takakota struggled to sit up. This isn't over. No, but we're closer than we were. She helped him lie back down. Rest. I need to give Morrison my statement. Sarah. He caught her hand again. What you did today, throwing that knife, standing with me against those men, your mother would be proud. Tears pricked her eyes. She'd be horrified. Proper young ladies don't throw knives at people. Proper young ladies don't survive what you survived. Don't seek justice for the slaughtered. His thumb traced her knuckles. You're not a proper lady anymore. You're a warrior. The tears came then, for her mother who'd died protecting her, for her father who'd died protecting his maps, for the girl she'd been who'd worried about hope chests and suitors. Takakota pulled her down beside him on the narrow cot, holding her while she cried. When the tears finally stopped, she found herself curled against his uninjured side, his arm around her shoulders. It was improper, scandalous, everything Mrs. Whitman accused her of. It was also the only place in the world she felt safe. "People will talk," she murmured. "Let them. Their words are wind." His voice rumbled beneath her ear. "Rest now. The real fight starts tomorrow." Sarah closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong despite everything. Outside, she could hear the town's stirring voices raised in argument, horses being saddled, the machinery of justice creaking into motion. Tomorrow there would be depositions, lawyers, a trial that would drag through weeks or months. Reed was still free, and Creech had resources they couldn't imagine. The battle was far from won. But for now, in this quiet room with sunlight filtering through dusty windows, they had survived another dawn, together. "Takakota," she whispered. "When this is over, the trial, all of it, what then?" He was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then we see who we are without war between us. Maybe that's when the real story begins. Sarah smiled against his chest, feeling something like hope kindle in her heart. They'd found each other in violence and loss, been forged together in the desert's cruel furnace. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something in peace too. The morning wore on, bringing new challenges, new complications, but in that small room, two unlikely warriors rested in each other's arms, gathering strength for the battles ahead. Justice was coming, slow and complicated and imperfect, but it was coming, and they would meet it together. Asterisk, asterisk, part 6. Dos mundos, asterisk, asterisk. 6 months later. Sarah stood in the doorway of the new schoolhouse, watching children of all colors file in for their morning lessons. The building smelled of fresh pine and possibility, its windows facing east to catch the morning light. Above the door, a carved wooden sign read Dos Mundos School in both English and Spanish. Mrs. Takakota. Maria won't share her slate. A pigtailed girl tugged at Sarah's skirt, indignation written across her freckled face. "Then perhaps you can show Maria how sharing makes both people happy," Sarah suggested, guiding the child back inside. "Remember what we learned about building bridges." The transformation still amazed her sometimes, from desperate survivor to schoolteacher, from Sarah Mackenzie to Sarah Takakota, from a world of rigid divisions to this small miracle of unity. The wedding 3 months ago had been its own bridge Apache ceremonies blending with Christian traditions. Takakota's grandmother bestowing her blessing while Judge Thornberry performed the legal rites. "Causing trouble already," Takakota's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. He moved with only the slightest stiffness now. The knife wound that had nearly killed him finally healed. No more than usual. She turned to face him, still feeling that flutter when their eyes met. "How was the meeting?" "Productive. The railroad approved 3 more Apache scouts for the survey team. Steady pay, respect for their knowledge of the land." He touched her cheek gently. "Your father's maps are being used to build something better than anyone imagined." Through the window, she could see the new settlement taking shape. Dos Mundos, 2 worlds, founded where the railroad would cross Apache trading routes. It wasn't large yet, maybe 40 buildings, but it was growing with purpose. Mexican merchants, Apache guides, American settlers, all working under laws that protected everyone equally. "Any word on Reed?" she asked quietly. "Nothing new. Some say he fled to California. Others think Mexico." Takakota's expression darkened slightly. "He'll surface eventually. Men like that can't stay hidden forever. And when he does, then justice finishes what it started." The trial had been everything Morrison warned: long, bitter, complicated. Creech's lawyers had tried every trick, painting Sarah as a fallen woman, Takakota as a savage manipulator. But the evidence was overwhelming the documents. The testimony of Don Francisco's men, the financial records Morrison's investigators uncovered showing payments for information acquisition that coincided with mysterious disappearances. In the end, Josiah Creech had hanged for murder, conspiracy, and trafficking in human souls. His network had crumbled, though pieces like Reed remained at large. More importantly, the trial had exposed the shadow economy of the frontier stolen information. Enslaved peoples, murdered witnesses, new laws were being drafted, new protections put in place. Mrs. Takakota. Another voice called from inside. Tommy put a lizard in Annie's lunch pail. Sarah sighed. I should go. Takakota smiled. I'll see you at noon. The council wants to discuss the water rights agreement. She watched him walk toward the meeting hall, still marveling at how naturally he moved between worlds. Scout, translator, mediator, he'd found his own bridge between the Apache way and the changing frontier. His search for Ayanna continued, but now with resources and legal backing. 3 young Apache women had already been recovered from bondage, returned to their families. The morning passed in the controlled chaos of teaching arithmetic and Apache words, English letters and Mexican songs, all blending in the voices of children who would grow up seeing diversity as normal rather than threatening. At noon, the school emptied for lunch, and Sarah found herself alone with her thoughts. She walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town, where wooden crosses marked the graves they'd been able to recover from the massacre site. Her parents rested here, along with the others who'd died for greed and maps. I hope you'd be proud, she whispered to the markers. Your maps are building bridges now, not just railways. They would be. The voice startled her Maria Esperanza. Visiting from Agua Prieta, the older woman placed flowers on each grave with reverent care. Your mother would see what you've become, teacher, bridge builder, warrior for justice. She would burst with pride. I never thought it would lead here. Sarah admitted, when Takakota found me in that cave, I just wanted to die. Now you live for all of them, for your parents, for the children you teach, for the future you're building. Maria smiled. And for him? The one who kissed your tears and taught you to fight. Sarah blushed. Is it that obvious? Love should be obvious. It's the hidden love that poisons. Maria arranged the last flowers. Don Francisco sends his regards. He says the new territorial governor is very interested in the Dos Mundos experiment. If it succeeds here, it could spread. Mixed communities with equal law, integrated schools, shared prosperity. Sarah dared to voice the dream aloud. My father mapped railways, but maybe we can map something better, paths between peoples, not just places. They walked back to town together, passing the new businesses taking root. Chen's General Store, where the Chinese merchant had relocated after hearing about the town's inclusive policies. Delgado's Cantina, where Apache, Mexican, and American sat at the same tables. The community medical clinic, where doctor, web-trained healers from all traditions. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still those who came seeking the old ways of exploitation and division. But Marshal Morrison's deputies, now including 2 Apache and 3 Mexican officers, kept the peace with even-handed justice. As they reached the school, a commotion in the street caught their attention. A lone rider approached from the east, slumped in his saddle. Horse lathered with hard travel. As he drew closer, Sarah gasped. Marcus Reed, but not the cold, calculating man from before. This Reed was gaunt, fevered, one arm bound in a filthy sling. He nearly fell from his horse in front of the marshal's office. Sanctuary, he croaked. I claim sanctuary and turn state's evidence. Morrison emerged, hand on his gun. Reed, took you long enough to show up. Been running. Creech had contingencies, men who don't forgive failure. Reed's eyes were haunted. They've been hunting me since the trial. I have information names, locations, the whole network. I'll tell everything for protection. Sarah found herself moving forward, Takakota suddenly beside her, both drawn by the drama unfolding. Reed saw them and actually smiled, a broken, bitter expression. The Apache and his white woman. You won. He coughed, specks of blood on his lips. I told Creech you were dangerous. He didn't listen. You're dying, Takakota observed clinically. A lung shot. Festering. Reed swayed. Week ago, maybe 2. Doesn't matter. What matters is the ledger in my saddlebags. Every name, every transaction. Creech was small compared to some. Morrison's deputies were already securing the saddlebags. Rifles trained on Reed despite his condition. Webb pushed through. Medical instincts overriding other concerns. Get him inside, dying or not. He doesn't do it in the street. As they carried Reed away, Sarah felt Takakota's hand find hers. It's really ending, she said softly. This part, but Reed's right, Creech was small compared to what's out there. He squeezed her fingers. The work continues. That evening, the whole town gathered in the meeting hall. Reed's information was already bearing fruit telegrams flying to federal marshals across the territory. Arrest warrants being prepared. The network that had fed on human misery for decades was finally being exposed to light. Judge Thornberry, visiting for the water rights negotiation, stood to address the crowd. What you've built here in Dos Mundos isn't just a town. It's a promise that the frontier doesn't have to be ruled by the gun and the whip. That law can mean justice for all, not just the powerful. The crowd, Apache, Mexican, American, Chinese, murmured approval. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she recognized faces in the crowd. Some had been there that terrible morning at the creek, ready to hang Takakota for crimes he didn't commit. Now they sat beside Apache families, their children playing together in the aisles. Change is hard. Thornberry continued. There'll be setbacks, conflicts, those who want to drag us back to the old ways. But look around you. Look at what's possible when we choose to see each other as human first, everything else second. After the meeting, Sarah and Takakota walked to their small house at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy adobe walls, a tin roof, windows Sarah had glazed herself. But it was theirs, built with their own hands and the help of neighbors from all communities. Reed died an hour ago, Takakota said as they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. Webb tried, but the infection was too far gone. Do you feel sorry for him? No, but I'm glad he turned evidence. Even evil men can choose a better ending. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. Do you remember that night in the cave when you kissed my tears? Every detail. His arm came around her. You wanted to die. I wouldn't let you. Best stubbornness ever. She smiled in the darkness. Though I didn't think so at the time. What changed? You showed me that surviving wasn't betrayal. That living well, building something good from the ashes, that's the real victory over men like Creech. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of their town. Somewhere, a guitar played Mexican melodies. Children's laughter echoed from the Apache section. A dog barked, answered by another across the cultural divide that was slowly, carefully being bridged. The railroad representatives want to hire more integrated survey teams, Takakota said eventually. Use the Dos Mundos model along the whole route. And I said yes, but only if they fund schools at each stop. He smiled. They agreed. Seems your teaching has made an impression. Sarah felt hope bloom in her chest, not just for them, but for all the children who would grow up in a better world. It wouldn't be perfect. There would still be prejudice, violence, those who profited from division. But change was taking root, watered with blood and tears and the stubborn refusal to accept that hatred was humanity's only option. I love you, she said simply, words that still felt like a miracle. And I love you, he replied in Apache, then Spanish, then English. In all languages, all worlds. As they prepared for bed, Sarah noticed a new addition to their bedroom, a cradle, beautifully carved with Apache symbols and pioneer roses intertwined. "When were you going to tell me?" Takakota asked softly, wonder in his voice. "I just found out for certain today. Webb confirmed it." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Due in spring. A child of 2 worlds. 3 worlds," he corrected, joy transforming his usually serious face. Apache, American, and something entirely new. That night, Sarah dreamed not of massacres in flight, but of children playing in the schoolyard, Apache and white, Mexican and Chinese, all together under the vast Arizona sky. She dreamed of her parents smiling, of Takakota's sister found and freed, of a frontier where justice meant justice for all. When she woke, Takakota was watching her, love and fierce protection in his eyes. "Good dreams?" he asked. "The best dreams worth building." Outside, dawn painted the desert in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere, a meadowlark sang to greet the new day. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, witness to all the changes below. Dos Mundos stirred to life, merchants opening shops, children gathering for school. The work of building a better world continuing one day at a time. It wasn't the ending Sarah had imagined when she'd crawled from beneath a burned wagon, more dead than alive. It was better. It was real. Love born from tragedy. Justice wrestled from corruption. Hope planted in ground watered by tears. This was their story. Not perfect, but true. Not easy, but worth every struggle. In the schoolhouse, children's voices rose in morning song. English and Spanish and Apache words blending into something beautiful and new. Sarah listened, hand resting on the promise growing within her, Takakota's strength beside her. The frontier was changing, and they were part of that change. Proof that 2 worlds could become one, that bridges could be built from the ashes of burned wagons and shattered lives. Together, they faced the rising sun and the future it promised, complicated, challenging, but bright with possibility. The Apache and the survivor, the warrior and the teacher, the husband and wife who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to build their light. Their story was ending. Their life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying these tales. Please comment below and share your thoughts about Sarah and Takakota's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, like this video, and hit the hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love, justice, and hope. Until our next adventure in the Old West, happy trails.